Eighth grade was the most important school year of my life. I consider this to be my coming of age story. If you don't know what a coming of age story is, it's basically where the main character, who is most of the time a child, experiences the evils of the real world. Think of books like To Kill a Mockingbird as an example. Eighth grade was my coming of age year. This was when I was exposed to how cruel the evil in people can be, but I also learned how nice and sweet people can be as well, and how significant I am to others. So today, I'm going to discuss my 8th grade year. I'm Zach, and this is Storytime 10 on March 5th, 2021. So before I begin with the backstory, I need to address a few things. First off, this video will discuss some very, very dark topics. I'll be talking about depression, threats of self-harm, bullying, suicide even, and other dark topics. While I think I'll be discussing is extremely important and something you should listen to, if you feel uncomfortable hearing about these dark topics, then click off the video, as these will be very common themes throughout the video. Secondly, this will be the most important video I think I'll ever make, as you might have already told from my first disclaimer. Third, I just want to go ahead and thank everyone who helped me through this dark time. Nobody should have gone what I went through, especially at only 13 years old. Anyways, let's roll on to the video. So a bit of backstory. So my 7th grade year was amazing. I met many new friends. Of course, I was bullied a bit in 7th grade, but it was just so hard to take the bullies seriously that I simply just laughed with them. I rarely got any homework and was almost never stressed out. Therefore, 7th grade was a major success. The summer of 2017 was also really good. For my 13th birthday, my parents bought me a video camera. So throughout the summer, I uploaded a Minecraft series, a Mario Galaxy series, and some reaction videos. All of these were really fun to make. Then, about a week before school started, I received my schedule. Normally, my schedule would have said things like 8th grade math, 8th grade reading, 8th grade science, and more. This was much different. I was going to be taking the hardest classes my school offered. I was taking accelerated 8th grade English, Algebra 1, or 9th grade math, World History, or 9th grade Social Studies, PE, and middle school Spanish. Wow, these are some hard courses. I should note that unlike the other story times that take place at early college, this takes place at a public middle school, so a lot crazier stuff happens. Now, our school is split up into teams for each grade. So in 8th grade had 3 teams, being the Rockets, Supernovas, and Vikings. I was a Rocket. The Rockets were basically the top 90 students in the grade. Everyone here would take world history, and in the second semester you could choose to take Earth Environmental Science. The top 60 would also take Algebra 1. I was somewhere in the top 20 from 7th grade, meaning I got to take Algebra 1. I also decided to take Earth Environmental Science in the second semester when World History ended. So it was now the first day of 8th grade. My first class was World History. So our World History teacher was in the military. He was stationed in Kuwait. However, he had an injury over there and was having back surgery, which put him out of work all the way until December. Therefore, we had an intern. This intern was super nice. I think the main reason why is because my mom actually taught her gymnastics a long time ago, so we already had a good relationship there. She was also a pretty laid back in terms of schoolwork. Assignments overall were easy, and I did very well in her class. World history in general was easy, as everything we discussed was very interesting and really engaging. Now, something to note is that these classes lasted a pretty long time. So our first class of the day is when. And I literally just randomly tapped the space bar, and now I am completely lost. I just went to I know y'all can't see it, but I just went straight to the very bottom of the document. So, anyways, our first class was When, or What I Need. It's basically a place where you learn stuff you struggle with. But if you are smart, then you choose your When. That's what happened with me, and I'll get to that later. But for now, When was in World History. So When lasted from 7:45 to 8:15. World History lasted from 8:15 to 9:15, which is a very long time for just one class. Of course, I take classes that last longer than high school, but normally my classes lasted an hour each. Having a class last this long was pretty crazy. So next was English. English was interesting, as it lasted from 9:55 to 10:40, and then from 12 to 12:40. The reason it worked like this is because during this time, I didn't have PE and lunch, which were probably the 2 worst periods, by the way, but I'll get to why. So English was actually pretty interesting. So our English teacher had adopted a baby with heart problems, and she wouldn't be back until September. Therefore, we had an intern take her place, much like we had for World History. Many students criticized this intern, but I honestly didn't mind her. She wasn't that bad. Of course, the teacher was way better, but our intern still did a good job in my opinion. So for English, each week we do a daily grammar practice, or GDP for short. We do them every day. So the first week, it was done for us, since most of us had no idea what the hell a prepositional phrase was, since some of us didn't have her in 7th grade. I should note that Manny had her, as well as the Algebra 1 teacher in 7th grade, as they had them for accelerated English and math. I did not have them for 7th grade. I won't state why, but it was for a very dumb reason. It was for the dumbest reason why. Anyways, in English, we also had to do a thing called AR, or Accelerated Reader for short. It's basically something everyone from 1st to 8th grade had to do in the state. It's where you read a book, and then on Accelerated Reader, you had to answer some questions about what you read. Each book gave a certain amount of points, and then you had to reach a goal of a certain amount of points for each quarter with an 85% accuracy on the quizzes. If you met your goal, then you would get 100 for AR. If not, it's a 0. AR counted 10% of our English grade, so it was imperative that I meet the goal every 9 weeks. I think I had to read like 4 or 5 books each 9 weeks in order to meet my goal. Of course, I met my goal all for 9 weeks, but it was really stressful, especially combined with algebra homework. But we're not done with AR. Once every 9 weeks, we'd also have to do a thing what's called an independent novel project, or INP for short. This would be where we would do 3 activities with one book for each quarter. I wrote this completely wrong. I said each book. It wasn't that bad. So I believe we had to write like a 1-page book report on it, then a presentation on the key points, as well as compare it to another book. I'll explain only the first one just because I don't really remember the others. So we had a lot for English, but it didn't compare to algebra. Before we get into algebra, let's discuss PE a bit, one of the classes between English and algebra. So PE was my least favorite class. We had to take it in both 7th and 8th grade both semesters each year. PE was so bad. The teachers were pretty mean, I was in it with bullies, and PE was just a pain in the ass in general. It lasted only 50 minutes, but it was still really cancerous, and also an easy way for the bullies to bully me, which I'll get to later. So now was lunch, which lasted from 11:30 to 12 o'clock. So lunch was probably the worst time of the day because of one rule. You can only eat with the students in your second block. For me, that was English, and I had very few friends in English, but I also shared it with some bullies. And I should note that I shared classes with bullies in all 3 classes. And then I basically was forced to sit with them. It was absolutely torture, being with the people you have problem with the most. I should note that I did try to find other tables to sit at, but nobody would let me sit with them. I mean, come on. There's an extra seat, and I really won't talk to you. Why not let me sit there? It was just so crazy and so chaotic in general. So I then had English for 40 more minutes, but then came math, or Algebra 1 in my case. It lasted from 12:40 to 2:10. This was probably the most challenging class I've ever taken. Basically, the information went by very quickly since the state thinks that shoving a billion topics in one course is somehow okay. Therefore, we were always rushing through. Most of the time, I was not able to grasp the information, which is why I struggled. Then we had homework every night, Monday through Friday, always due the next day too. It generally was about 3 to 4 pages a night, doing approximately maybe 50 problems a night. So that's around an hour and a half a night. But that ain't all. I then basically had to do another hour and a half to grasp all the information from the lessons, as almost every lesson taught something new and required me to take a ton of time to understand it. So it took me a cumulative 3 hours of homework a night, and that is just from algebra. This doesn't include English or other homework. So you can just imagine how exhausted I was from all this. I did not get home until 9 o'clock on Mondays, 7 o'clock on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and 8:30 on Wednesdays because of swim practice and church. Now, my parents had a bedtime for me at 10 o'clock. I normally had to stay past 11 to do homework. Of course, my parents really didn't enforce the bedtime much since obviously I was doing homework, but damn. You could be asking, why not just write random answers? Well, our teacher graded our homework based on accuracy, meaning the percent you got right is what you made, so you can't just write in random numbers, or you'll probably get a 0. Now, you might be thinking negatively about my algebra teacher. Like, how could he give so much homework? Well, the homework is really how I learned how to do the math, and that's why I'm so good at it now. The homework is what taught me since I was doing it myself. Also, this algebra teacher was absolutely amazing. When asked about a teacher that tried extremely hard to make sure I was successful, this teacher would be my first thought. So every other Friday, I would skip PE in order to get a tutoring session with him. Not only was I getting extra practice that I heavily needed, but I was also skipping out on PE, a massive win-win. I think that while he gave a lot of work that was kind of excessive at times, it still helped me and he made sure I did well in the class. And I did. Of course, struggled a ton, but I managed to pull through. Now we reached the final class of the day, being Spanish, which lasted from 2:10 to 3 o'clock. So Spanish was pretty easy in my opinion. All I remember from the class was that the teacher was from Venezuela, and I also learned a bit of Spanish vocabulary. Of course, now my Spanish is way better, but it was not too good when I did it. I do remember it being boring, but it was only for 50 minutes, so it really didn't bother me. Now let's discuss 3 very important friends. So 2 of these I met in 7th grade, and the other I met in 8th grade. These 3 friends are the main reasons why I managed to survive this chaotic year. I think the best part about all of this is that we're all still friends today, even though I go to a different school than all of them, as I went to early college and they went to traditional high school. So first up is Ryan. I met Ryan in 7th grade. He's a very chill dude. He's really smart as well. Along with my algebra teacher, Ryan also helped me out in algebra, as he, of course, did really well. Ryan has always been that friend that no matter what you do, he'll never get angry. I never have seen Ryan angry at all. Now, another cool thing about Ryan that all 3 of these friends have in common is that we all love the same video games, so we often play Minecraft or Pokemon together. And I should note that, yes, this is the same Ryan that helps run my Discord server, and the same Ryan that often joins me in Pokemon Showdown streams. Next, I want to talk about Robbie. So me and Robbie's friendship began in the 7th grade. Just like Ryan, Robbie also helps with my Discord, and he joins me in Pokemon Showdown streams. Now, of course, Ryan is probably the smartest of all of us, but Robbie is still very smart, and he's very nice. I remember back in 8th grade, a lot of people talked shit about Robbie. I'm pretty sure it had to do with the bullies who also bullied Robbie. I think that me being friends with Robbie helped him out too, as he had someone to rely on. We only had English together though. While I could have just sat with him, it didn't work out, as he never did all of his homework, therefore he had silent lunch at a different table. I should note that occasionally I would put myself in silent lunch just so I wouldn't have to deal with the bullies. Next, I want to discuss a friend I met in 8th grade. So his name is Sebrin. He was well known at school for his YouTube channel, where he streamed games like Minecraft and GTA 5. However, his channel would get terminated in 9th grade after some asshole who was jealous of all the attention he got reported his channel. YouTube terminated it. But nonetheless, he was still known for it. He made a new channel, but I won't mention it just to make sure that he does not get banned again on it. Should also note that I never talked about my channel at all throughout middle school, since I kind of felt uncomfortable about mentioning it, since most of my videos were pretty cringe and obviously I went by a different name. Now I just really don't give a shit. I just mention my channel to those who ask. But anyways, that's what Sebrin was known for. He also played golf, and I had only had algebra with him. So now I want to talk about the bullies, which I've stated over and over. But the reason I've mentioned the bullies over and over is because they played a massive role in 8th grade. So in 6th and 7th grade, I was bullied, but I barely can even consider it bullying, as it was just too hard to take these people seriously. A good example would be in 7th grade. One bully literally came up to me and said, "I stared at your mom's pussy last night." How am I supposed to take this dude seriously? It's almost impossible not to laugh at them, as I often laughed with them. But in 8th grade, things were different. So the bullies this time were obviously completely different people. But I'm just gonna say they are far worse. These bullies must have thought they were tough. Looking back at it, they weren't tough at all. They were a bunch of cowards who picked on people that are left out. They thought they were so cool because they were on the football team, but that ain't tough. Everyone who tried out got on the football team. They ain't special. They're a bunch of weak little shits with no life. However, I never realized this in 8th grade, and I wish I did, as it would have put me in a less conflict. I am in no means better than the bullies, but I wish I understood that they are not special and they are not above me. If they were actually above me, they wouldn't be trying to mess with me, but we'll get to that later. I also want to mention one of the bullies. This bully was on the football team. He was a midget. He literally had to look up just to insult me. I was maybe 5'4" during this time, and he was 5 foot. He also looked very scrawny. So what position did he play? Well, I'm not sure, but if you ask me, I'd argue he was probably the football. In fact, I'm going to refer to him as the football throughout the story. Next, I want to fast forward to early September of 2017. This was when we finally began WIN. So if you made good grades, you got to choose your WIN. I chose to do Science Olympiad, which is what I did for WIN in 7th grade. It was really fun and I'm glad I did it. So basically, Science Olympiad is where you can choose from different events to try to create something, or you might be required to answer questions about a certain topic. I just do the mini hovercraft event, which is where you had to take a physics test and then you had to race hovercraft. I never went to the competition to do it, as I'll explain a bit in this video. So the interesting thing about this was my teacher for the class. So she was a science teacher, obviously, but I did not have her for 8th grade science. Instead, I actually have her right now for chemistry. Yes, my Science Olympiad instructor from 7th and 8th grade is actually my current chemistry teacher in 11th grade right now. She's really good, and I'm making a 98 in her class right now. Her class is also super enjoyable, but I'd also have her for a class in 8th grade that I'll talk about the second semester, but we'll get there. So that's what WIN was. Let's discuss a world history assignment that I made a 43 on. The assignment revolved around some document-based questions. However, we then had to do an essay at the end. I didn't realize we had to do the essay, so I lost about 40 points. This didn't really affect me long term, as I still did exceptionally well in this class, as we'll see later. I just wanted to bring that up since it's kind of funny thinking about it. Now let's discuss how I'm doing mentally. So around late September to early October, I got depressed. The depression would last until early March, where it would get extremely serious. But for now, it wouldn't be as serious. Depression was caused by obviously being bullied at school, and it was also because of schoolwork being flooded down my throat, as well as cyberbullying too. My throat picked the worst time to get. Oh my god! Jesus Christ, my throat hurts so much. So I haven't really talked about PE that much, so let's talk about that. As I mentioned earlier, PE was the worst class of the day. PE teachers were mean, and of course the bullies were the teacher's absolute favorite students. So basically how it works is that if you played football, PE teachers automatically liked you and gave you a 100 instantly. I of course didn't play football, as I never did or cared about sports, so therefore the PE teachers didn't like me. I still made an A though, so at least I got that. Also in PE, we did a thing called tracks. This is basically where you got to choose what you do for PE for about 2 to 3 weeks. I don't remember mine since obviously this was 3 years ago, but I do remember most of the time picking the ones my friends were in and the ones the bullies were not in, which worked somewhat well. The reason it didn't work that well was because the bullies could still harass me during warm-up. So now probably the worst part about PE was the warm-up. We had to do 3 things. We could do 3 things: dancing, jogging, and insanity. We'd only do 1 of these per day. Dancing was probably the best one, but it was still hell. We basically had to dance to random stuff from Just Dance. I of course never tried this as I found it really weird. We also had to do it in certain numbered groups if the dance was for 2 or 4 people. I had friends at least, so it wasn't that bad. Jogging was also pretty bad. We would basically have to run like 2 songs. I should note that it's running, as walking can get points taken off. I was also always out of breath from these, even with me running as slowly as possible. Finally, we have insanity. The other 2 warm-ups were hell, but this felt like the depths of Tartarus. Insanity would be where we did a ton of exercises in a short time by doing them while watching a video of some fitness trainer shouting out random bullshit that obviously no one really cared about. It might seem easy, but trust me, it was the absolute worst torture you could bring to 12 to 14-year-olds. None of this was new though, as we all did this back in 7th grade. So that's what PE was about. Let's move on. So I want to discuss the only INP I'm really going to discuss throughout this video. So The Maze Runner is my favorite book. It was amazing. The movie was also absolutely amazing, so I decided to pick its sequel, The Scorch Trials. Not as good as The Maze Runner, but still really good. I did my INP on it. It was pretty easy to do, and I honestly don't remember much from other getting 100, and I don't remember at all from the other ones too. So next, let's get into one of the 2 fights I got to see myself in the school year. So 8th grade really didn't have as many fights as 7th grades, and definitely weren't as brutal as they were in 7th grade. So let's discuss one that took place in November of 2017. So we were in PE doing warm-up, which was jogging. Then, right in front of me, I saw two boys yelling at each other. What made this extremely funny is that one of the boys was 4'10", while the other was literally 6'1", so you could tell what happened there. I can't remember what they were arguing about. All I remember was the 6'1" dude tackled this dude, and they started fighting. They didn't throw punches, though. I do remember a lot of people hurtling around me to see the fight. We just casually all spectated the fight while the PE teachers came running in. We had to redo the warm-up, though, which sucked, but seeing the fight firsthand was definitely worth it, as I had never seen a fight with like this in my own eyes. But one thing I do want to say is I lost my place. Yay! But one thing I do want to say is, wow, those boys are stupid. You're already stupid enough to have a physical fight, but you're on the next level of stupid to fight in front of 4 teachers. There would be one more fight in April, which I'll also discuss when we get there. Let's discuss what we're doing in English. So the IMP for English was very interesting. We basically had to create a diary of the main character from our book and make it look really old. My book was Code Talkers, which is basically a book about a Marine during World War II. I did the writing and made it look old by burning it, which my mom helped me out with. It was successful, made 100 on it. That was being counted as our IMP for the second quarter. Another thing that occurred during this time was our English teacher came back. However, she'd have to leave again, as unfortunately her baby she adopted passed away. She'd returned in January. So there's also another class. Well, not really a class. It lasted from 3 to 4 on Wednesdays. It was a tutoring session with our algebra teacher. What I really liked about this was that no bullies went to tutoring that day, so it was literally perfect. I was able to get help and not be harassed. And also another thing too was that we were allowed to talk with everyone. Teacher didn't really go up to teach. It was just you'd go up to them if you had questions. I remember one time meeting a girl while in tutoring. I believe her name was Brittany, but I'm not sure, as this was a pretty long time ago. I believe we started talking when I helped her with a math problem, as she was taking 8th grade math. I managed to help her out with it. Pretty sure it had something to do with the slope, but I'm not sure. After a while, I had a conclusion that she might have feelings for me. I never asked her out and never dated her, but I think this might have been the case. I really am not sure where she is now, as it's been 3 years since we've last talked. I'll admit she was cute though, although I never had feelings for her. But I think that was a pretty interesting situation, as I really never talked to any girls during this time. Mostly because I had the idea that no girls were really interested, even though I could count 2, Brittany and another one. I should note that no girls are really interested in me now, so like, I'm not really into girls, since nobody's into me. So, I can also remember another situation like this. However, I don't remember this girl's name. So I remember while waiting to go to algebra, I overheard a conversation between the football and this girl. I don't know what the girl said, but I remembered what the football said. He said, "How the F do you like Zach?" I also heard him laugh a bit. I remember that me and the girl never talked, which was a big mistake. She was also pretty cute, so why didn't I? Like, I basically heard it right there that she liked me, but I guess we'll never know because obviously I cannot remember. So in mid-December, we finally had our world history teacher return from Kuwait. So I mentioned before that he was in the military, and I think you know where I'm going from here. This teacher was obviously very strict. He also gave us some weird speeches despite not hearing the full story of any given situation. So one day we were to do work. I finished mine, so I went back to my seat. I didn't have a book on me, as I already met my AR goal. He had asked why I didn't have a book. But before I could answer him, he proceeds to make an entire lecture to the class about why you should come prepared if you're going to be successful. Like, come on, dude. I literally had no reason to read. Time was up by the time he finished the lecture, and thank God. I had him for only 2.5 weeks, but I'm glad I only had him for that long. He also did this with another student who needed to sharpen his pencil. Like, come on. Where else are they going to sharpen their pencil? That is literally the time to sharpen your pencil. I'd ultimately have the last laugh on this, although it didn't come until June. I should note that Aki, if you remember from my story time about swimming, also had this teacher. Surprisingly, he really liked him. No clue why. Let's get on to Christmas break. It was well deserved, especially after a tough semester. Oh, and yes, we did have homework for math over the break, so rip on that one. Anyways, Christmas 2017 was a great Christmas in my opinion, even with struggling with depression. I also got a new phone, and I got a 2DS, since my 3DS broke like 3 months earlier. We then went to our uncle's house, who lives all the way in Delaware, so Christmas break overall was really good. Now, we aren't actually done with the first semester yet. My school runs on a different schedule so that the semester ends on Christmas break, that's my current school right now. But for traditional schools, like the one I'm discussing, ends for Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. So I still had a couple weeks of the first semester. So the second to last day of the semester, I had my world history final exam. Final was overall really easy, and I made an A on it. This is mostly because our teacher had given us last year's final to practice with, which is how I was able to do very successfully on. So now we move on to the second semester of 8th grade, probably the toughest semester in my entire academic career. Let's start off with 3 new classes. So for the second semester, I was taking 8th grade science. This replaced world history. Now this teacher, I'm just going to say, is probably one of the greatest teachers I have ever had. Like, if it wasn't for her, I probably wouldn't even be alive right now. I'll explain that a bit later, but anyways, this teacher was so good. Now, 8th grade science was a cakewalk. I made like a 96 in the class, so it wasn't that much. It went by quick though, as we normally took it for the entire year, and we were only doing it for a semester here because we took world history. I then wanted to discuss another new class. So Spanish was just a semester-long course, just like world history, and so now I was going to be taking art. I suck at art, but art was actually really easy. As long as you do the work, you will make a 100. That's what I did, so I made a 100. I should note that I shared this class with Ryan, but I also shared it with a bully. This was not the football, by the way. I refer to this kid as Sir because of a situation that happened in May, which I'll get to later. But since I had Ryan, I didn't have to worry about Sir, since obviously the bullies knew I had loyal friends. But overall, art was pretty easy. So the next course was completely optional. We didn't have to take it, but I chose to. Looking back at it, I think it was foolish, and I should have not signed up for it, as it never really affected me like algebra or world history did. This was Earth Environmental Science, which is a high school science course. The course itself was not hard, as the concepts were easy to grasp. It was those damn labs. The labs were absolutely torturous, as we had to send pictures of us doing the lab. This made it so hard and just a pain in the ass. As I knew the concepts, the labs were just annoying. Fortunately, around late March, I would actually find the labs to be way easier, which I'll discuss later. So this was a completely online course. Everything we did was online, and this course was also taught by my Science Olympiad instructor, or my chemistry teacher right now. So throughout the story time, I've been talking about everything in a pretty unprofessional and humorous tone. We now move into what I consider to be the darkest time period of my life. This is no joking period. It was very rough and involves some very, very serious situations that I hope that you learn from. Therefore, the fun and games I've done throughout the story time are gone. This is serious mode. Anyways, let's begin. So I mentioned earlier that around September to early October that I started struggling with depression. This is when the depression really impacts me to the point it became really hard for me to do a lot of the things I once did. So the bullies have not stopped. In fact, they got worse. One example of this would be they would try to sit at different lunch tables, meaning I was left alone. Yeah, it really felt like everyone was trying to avoid me, and I don't know why. Like, I didn't think I was cool then, and I still don't think I'm cool now. But like, why leave this kid sitting at a table by himself? I understand for the other classes since they couldn't do anything, and I understand for the people sitting far away. But for those close to me, why? I get you might not like me, which is completely okay. I don't like you either, but why would you leave me by myself and not at least feel sorry for me? I think the bullies did this on purpose in order to embarrass me. As a result, I started feeling very hopeless, mostly from this situation. Of course, depression started taking me to emotions I never really felt. During this time, I started developing suicidal thoughts from this situation. Nobody cares about you. Everyone would be happy if you died. You were the biggest mistake of this world. This world would be a better place without you. All of these thoughts came into my mind during this time, and even today, it is still very painful to think about this time period. During this time, I truly believed that I was just an inconvenience to everyone at lunch. They were all eating together, making jokes, acting up, and doing whatever bullshit they wanted, while there was just me sitting at a table by himself because nobody cared about him. Knowing this, that's what drove me to behind having suicidal thoughts. Now you might be wondering, why haven't my parents found out about yet? Well, I was very good at disguising my feelings, and I still am today. My parents thought I was okay and nothing was wrong, when in reality everything was wrong, and my world was completely upside down. I actually would not be the one to tell them. My parents that I had depression. That would be my teachers, which I discuss now. So, I remember sometime in mid-February when my mom had a conference with my teachers. So my teachers believed that I was going through depression, and they'd be right. Lots of students reported me being irritable, and I also, of course, was sitting by myself at lunch, so they wanted to do something about it. So the first thing they did was talk to my mom while I was at PE. My counselor also participated, whom I'll discuss more in a bit. They talked about that, and then me and my parents had a conversation at night. So that was when I finally told them that I was being bullied and I was depressed. They listened, and we decided to do something about it. Now let's talk about my counselor and what she did to help me. So my counselor was so awesome, and I'm very, very thankful for her. During PE one day, the counselor invited me to her office, where we discussed the whole situation. She understood the struggle I was going through, and it really seemed like I couldn't do anything to get out of this situation. We agreed to have me sit in a room by the cafeteria for lunch. This room was right by the principal's office too, so therefore I ate lunch alone every day. I also explained to my counselor that Robbie was my best friend in this class. Robbie never sat with me, as Robbie did not want to be near the bullies, since he hated them. But considering Robbie's table was full, I really had no choice. I think it's okay Robbie never ate lunch with me, as if he had eaten lunch with me around the bullies, he would have probably gotten both of us into some very deep trouble with them. He also sat at a table far away from mine, so when I was eating alone, he really couldn't see me. Now, I think that if he was able to see me, I think he'd go over and talk to me. I wish he did, as it was just absolutely painful eating alone at my own table while hundreds of students in the cafeteria at a time were eating together. Therefore, only Robbie knew about where I was eating, so he'd be the person to tell me we were leaving lunch whenever the time came. Now, I was being bullied at PE from these bullies, and of course the PE teachers never gave two shits about it since they loved the bullies for being jocks, so PE was still very atrocious. Now, I've hit very deep depression. Let's discuss the effects of it. So first off, my grades plummeted. For quarter 3, I made a borderline 80 in math and a borderline 90 in English. In science, I made a 95, since it was probably the easiest class. For Earth and Environmental Science, I grew an 86. I also grew a bad habit, irritability. I often cussed at others. Now, obviously, I still cuss today. I mean, I've already cussed a shitload of times throughout this video, but I never do it excessively. In 8th grade, I mentioned that I was bullied a lot. Therefore, in PE or in the hallway, if I heard someone say anything negative about me, I would immediately get extremely defensive and cuss excessively. I'd say maybe every other word I spoke was the F word. I cussed excessively as a way to deal with haters, since I was already hated enough. This is a very bad habit and ultimately counterproductive, as it made me feel worse about myself as well as made others feel worse about themselves. While it did make me feel good for like 2 minutes, it would later make me feel very bad about myself. But yet I continued cussing at people. So now, although my counselor tried to fix the situation, all it really did was fix a problem. It never really hit the root of the problem. I still was bullied and still had a ton of schoolwork, but I was also being cyberbullied, so I got into a lot of drama online. I also got sent death threats online too by a YouTuber after I tried to defend a girl who was also sent death threats by this man. I won't mention his name, as he was just such a lowlife, he doesn't deserve to be mentioned. I remember what he said, but I'm not going to say the death threats since they're just vile and disturbing, and it's really just hard for me to mention them since they even disturb me, and it's really hard to disturb me. I also think it's outrageous that he sends these to a 13-year-old boy when he was 24. What a disgusting man. However, give about a year, and karma is going to bite him in the ass big time. Now, I want to discuss a major decision I made, applying to go to an early college high school. So an early college is a high school where you can get both a high school diploma and an associate of arts, or an associate of science in high school, meaning you'd only have to do 2 years of college at a university. It was free, meaning you'd be saving thousands of dollars in college. I applied to go here in February, and I also attended a meeting back in January. I had multiple reasons why I chose to go here. Obviously because I was bullied at school, and I also wanted to go here because I cared about school and hated going to school with a bunch of people who didn't care about school. It was the perfect place for me. Getting here, though, was a challenge, as the admissions were determined by lottery, meaning it would be random if you were chosen. You probably know what happened already, but I'll explain when we get there. So now we reached March, and wow, this month was probably the worst month of my life. And 8th grade in particular was the worst day of my life. Now, if you know me, I like giving names to a lot of people and events. I already gave names to 2 of the bullies. I've given a lessons names in previous videos, but I never mentioned a name for a day or a period. I like to refer to March 8th as the darkest day of my life, although I often consider it the events. This will be the day that I ultimately break down. So before I discuss March 8th, let's discuss the events right before it. So the first week of March, I sounded relatively happy. However, deep inside, I was on the verge of ending it all. I received more death threats from the dude I talked about earlier. I had a lot of work to do, and I think the football might have insulted me one day. And I'm going to give a warning again, as this is when things get extremely dark and very depressing. But it is also the most important event in not just 8th grade, but probably my entire life. Anyways, let's get into it. So March 8th was a rather unusual day to begin with. I was completely overwhelmed with work that day. If I remember correctly, I had some algebra homework, an IMP for English, some earth environmental work, including a lab, some 8th grade science work, even more work, and just a whole lot of other work I had to do. It was also an early release day, meaning I was getting out at 1 p.m. Then I got another death threat that morning, which really set the mood. I mentioned earlier that I had suicidal thoughts throughout this time, and this would be when I let my thoughts affect me. I went from having suicidal thoughts to having a plan to commit suicide. I'm not going to discuss the plan since it's just so difficult for me to talk about it, but I will mention that it began that morning and I would end it all that night. However, I never completed it. No, my science teacher saved me. So that day, she noticed I was acting very peculiar. She noticed my hand had some marks on it, and she also noticed I didn't answer a single question on the quizzes as we did that day. Normally, when it came to quizzes or Kahoot, I always placed first, but I didn't even attempt any question, so she knew something was up. She apprehended me after the match, and I told her everything. She then got me in contact with the counselor, whom I also discussed what my thoughts were. My counselor then called my mom, who left work there to be with me. My counselor said I didn't need to be at school, and she was damn right. I really did not need to be at school. I needed professional help. So we talked in private room. Now my youth pastor at church came to the school that day to greet everyone who went to church. So he did this about once a week, and very conveniently he was there this day. My mom spotted him and asked if I'd be okay if he joined us, so I said sure. So he joined us while we were discussing what's going to have to occur. It's also the first day I had cried in a very long time. Now, I rarely cry. I just don't do it that much, excluding this. The only other time I've cried in the past 5 years is back in November of 2020, when a friend passed away. So for me to cry meant that yes, this was extremely serious, and I was very sad. I was able to live life with depression, but now I just couldn't take it anymore. My mom drove me home that day at around 11. I cried the entire trip home, and so did she. I couldn't imagine being the parent of a child who had the thoughts as I did, knowing that your child went through something as severe as I did. Wow, that must have been very hard as a parent. We got home. I remember my mom just hugging me for a while, which we then both fell asleep. So around, I think, maybe 3:30, my mom drove me to the mental hospital. My dad also met us there. I got situated into the hospital and was sent to my room. I remembered that I never ate anything that day, as I was just so depressed. So I mentioned that I was admitted to the hospital on Thursday, March 8th, 2018. I would be in the hospital until March 13th, 2018, Tuesday. Before I talk about my stay, though, I want to discuss the effects of the darkest day had on others. So my sister knew about the situation and was told at school. Therefore, my mom made an arrangement for my aunt to pick her up from school and take her to her house, as my sister also should not be at school knowing what her older brother was going through. According to her, she cried all that night. My parents were also struggling very heavily during this time. As stated earlier, my parents had to go through the thought that their son was so depressed to the point that he did not want to live anymore. It was really hard for them both. While they would both still try to live life as normal, it was very weird and it was very difficult for them too. It was not just my family that it affected. It also affected Robbie. Now, Robbie was the only student who knew about the situation, so I can't mention others. I believe my counselor talked to him in private about it, but it negatively affected Robbie, as he was under tons of pressure knowing what happened to his friend. The next day was also a struggle. That morning, one of the bullies said to throw it at the... That morning, one of the bullies said something to him, and he just had enough. So he picked up a chair and attempted to throw it at the bully. The bully was able to take the chair from Robbie and drop it down safely. Robbie got suspended. My counselor told my parents about the situation, and my parents then told me about it. Robbie says he forgot about the situation with him throwing the chair, which I understand, but I don't think he did. He probably does not like to talk about it, which I also completely understand too. Now, I want to discuss my stay at the mental hospital now. I was planning on making it its own story time, but I decided to include it here since it also is very vital. And it's not just this situation, but it was vital to my entire life story so far. I was told that I would probably be discharged by Sunday. However, I'd actually not be discharged until Tuesday, March 13th. I won't be discussing too much though, but I will mention the important parts. Before I discuss the first day, I want to discuss the structure and how each day at the hospital went. And also, we could get a bit happier after March 8th, because we're not at March 8th, but this was still a very depressing time, and I was still undergoing depression. So our wing was split into 2 hallways, one for boys and one for girls. I was the only person on the boys' hallway from Friday to Tuesday. We'd interestingly get a boy on Sunday, but he was with the girls for whatever reason, I don't know, nor do I really care. Therefore, I just refer to it as my hallway since I was the only person there. But the hallways led to the group room, where all of us would do groups. Groups were basically the activities to help us out mentally. It was also where we ate and had family meetings. Interestingly, I was allowed my normal clothes as well as some items from the outside. My parents brought me some clothes from home. So in my opinion, this really never felt like a hospital, as I was wearing my normal clothes, which I think was a good thing, as it made me feel more relaxed and made me feel at home, as I got really homesick my stay. So now let's discuss the first full day there. I got settled in that day. I also met my doctor and some of the nurses. It was a rough day, especially trying to adapt to my new life for the next couple days. I should note that I didn't know when I'd be discharged until the day I was discharged, so I really never looked forward to anything. I mean, I was already unhappy enough. I felt that I had basically no hope. I remember my first day of me just trying my best just to get discharged early. Of course, the nurses knew what I was up to. They'd seen it a billion times, therefore I think I kind of had to stay longer. But that was not the only reason I think I stayed longer than expected. The other reason would be because of a thing that all hospitals suck at, food. So breakfast was okay, but then for both lunch and dinner, we had chicken tenders and fries. Now you might be thinking, well, it ain't that bad, but it really was. Eating the same thing twice every day was awful, and I ended up losing my appetite. I didn't eat much throughout my entire stay, since obviously my appetite was lost. It's probably why I stayed longer, as I didn't eat a whole lot. Throughout the story time, I'll refer to this food as dog shit. So while I was at the hospital, my parents looked through my phone. That's when they saw all the death threats I received, as well as screenshots I had saved of the death threats. That's when they realized that no, it was not just being bullied and being stressed that I was depressed. It was also from receiving death threats online. I never told them about the death threats prior to them finding them on my phone. Now, every night, parents were able to visit us. My parents visited me every night I was there. We had some very serious conversations every night except Monday, which I'll discuss what that conversation was about since it was a very interesting one, as well as one of the best conversations I think I ever had. However, I do want to discuss one rather significant incident that happened when I was talking to my parents that Friday. So, me and my parents were just talking very seriously, and one of my nurses came up. I remember her exact words, "You are way too smart to be here. You should not be here when you're that smart." All the faculty who worked at this wing knew I was pretty smart. I mean, I did use big words a lot and literally did math homework in my free time. But this message really left an impact on me, as I realized that, yeah, I'm really smart, and I think I'm a really smart person too. I think I'm really smart. The boys as well as myself. Okay, well, I didn't. Yeah, I wrote this script very badly. But basically what I meant to say is that I thought that I was not a very smart person. The boys as well as myself often told me that I was really dumb. What's really weird about this is that my IQ is about 30 points above the average, but I let others decide how I felt, which is why I felt stupid when I was not. So I really got to give credit to the nurse here for making me remember who I was. Now, other than what the nurse told me that day, I remember my parents mentioning Robbie throwing the chair, but also discussed the death threats. Now, Sunday, I ended up getting sick and vomited, as Saturday was when my doctor prescribed me Zoloft, a drug that slows down the brain and helps with depression. It was very uneasy getting on the drug, but I got used to it starting Monday. I'm also pretty sure I got prescribed 2 other drugs to help me settle with the Zoloft, which is a bit interesting and also quite interesting. That line was so poorly written. I managed to get used to Zoloft even with the other 2 drugs. Anyways, that's what happened Sunday. Now, let's go on to Monday, March 12th, 2018. This was a very important day that day, and this would be because of the meeting with my parents that day. So the previous couple days, we talked very seriously, and we should have. There's a time and place for everything, and this was the time to be serious. However, this day for visitation, we just talked normally as well as cracked a few jokes. This was mainly because they were late since they got into traffic. I'd say this was probably the most effective talk my parents gave me during my stay, since it made me feel included and just really fun to talk about in general. I also cracked a few jokes about the stay as well as exaggerated about the dog shit. It's probably one of the best conversations I had with my parents, since it was just fun to talk about and really made me happier. I think that in my opinion, this conversation alone is what got me out of depression. Just being able to talk normally with my parents was just so cool, and it really made me feel happier. The only serious things I mentioned in this were when they told me that my friends at school, more specifically Robbie, were missing me and ready for me to come home. I think that this was a turning point in my depression, understanding that yes, people cared about me, and yes, I have a major impact on others, really made me feel a lot better and a lot more calm. I really didn't want this conversation to end though, as it was so engaging and made me progressively happier. So next, we reached Tuesday, and for some reason, I was really happy that day. Why? Well, I predicted that I would be discharged that day, and that ended up turning into a self-fulfilling prophecy. So just 5 days earlier, March 8th, 2018, was one of the worst days of my life. March 13th, 2018, in contrast, would be one of the best days of my life. So my doctor told me that she thought I was doing really well, especially after the conversation with my parents the night before. So she decided to discharge me. It was a great feeling, as I absolutely dreaded my experience. But finally, being happy again was something I hadn't really felt in a long time, and wow, it felt amazing. So my mom left work that day earlier to pick me up at around noon. Now, my mom already knew how bad the dog shit was, so she took me to Cracker Barrel, a restaurant I absolutely love. I ate a vegetable plate. My meal included lima beans, steamed broccoli, pinto beans, and mac and cheese. This is the best meal I had ever eaten in my entire life. 5 days of eating the same shit for lunch and dinner, and now eating something completely different felt so relieving, and the food tasted even better than it normally did. Afterwards, we went to my sister's school to pick her up early. She saw me by the office door and came running to hug me. It made her really happy knowing I wasn't depressed anymore, and also made me really happy knowing I was getting to see her again. Afterwards, we then went home. We played some games. I also remember my dad being thrilled when he got back from work. Finally, I remember ending the day off watching The Big Bang Theory with my mom, drifting to sleep on my own as happy as I could be. Wow, that was a lot to talk about. It was very difficult for me to talk about all this, as it was such an awful event knowing I was in such a dark state. So now that this mess had happened, a lot of things were going to change. So while I was at the hospital, my parents talked to the principal, and she agreed to switch my classes so that I had all of my classes with a lot of friends. More specifically with Ryan. I now had all of my classes with Ryan, since he was just a great role model and an amazing friend to have. My seat was also arranged so that I sat with Ryan in all my classes. Ryan was such a blessing. He really was smart, he understood my struggle, and he was such an amazing role model. And also the best part is that he's still a very close friend of mine today. We still talk. Another thing that changed was YouTube. So I did a YouTube throughout all this, and I never demonstrated my depression in any YouTube videos. I really just stayed happy in all of my videos. However, I'd quit YouTube entirely. I would, of course, eventually come back, but that would be in another 4 months. Next up was quitting social media for an entire month. I needed to focus on my mental health, so I didn't do anything on social media for a while. My parents also took my phone away for the rest of March. I'm very glad that they did though. It allowed me to work on my mental health and put me under a lot less stress. Then, we as a family were going to spend more time and do more fun stuff together. So this situation had really put us in a bad spot, as stated multiple times before. My parents and my sister struggled very heavily during this time. Therefore, we started doing more activities together. We started playing games as a family more. We also now do family dinner every night, except on Wednesdays and Fridays, something we never did before this situation. Because before this, we never did family nights, and now we were doing family nights every night, and I think this caused my mental health to skyrocket. Another thing that changed would be medicine. So I mentioned starting to take Zoloft earlier. When I started taking it, I thought that I was going to have to take it for the rest of my life. Needless to say that this was false. I would, however, take this medication all the way until the beginning of junior year. In September of 2020, I decided to stop taking the medication since not only did I often forget to take it, I also felt that it was unnecessary to take it now that I was much happier and more mature. 6 months later, and I still think it was a good decision. I'm glad I laid off the Zoloft, but I'm still thankful for it since it helped me a lot during the times that I needed it. Workload for school also changed. So during this time, I think my teachers, more specifically my algebra teacher, were concerned about my stress level since my stress led me to the darkest day. So the average amount of schoolwork I received per night was a ton. Now I was receiving less. I still was of course receiving a lot, but it wasn't as much. As a result, my grades skyrocketed. I even made an A in algebra for quarter 4, clocking in at a 94. Should note that for quarter 4, I made all A's. Also, the deep depression took place in third quarter, why I made the worst grades that quarter. See that fun, 5 times fast. One final thing that changed was therapy sessions. So now I would be talking to a mental therapist once every 2 weeks. Now this change is like the family dinners, as we still continue to do this even after 3 years. My mental therapist is absolutely amazing. I remember my first meeting with her. It was exactly 1 week after the darkest day, meaning it was March 15th, 2018. I remember after finishing the session and thinking, wow, this is going to help me a ton. I did this every other week before March 15th, 2018, to the end of the freshman year. Starting that summer after freshman year, I started to have mental therapy sessions with her once a month. I did this until near the end of sophomore year. At the end of the sophomore year, the coronavirus pandemic occurred. So starting late sophomore year to now, I've only had her having meetings with maybe once every 4 months. However, having these mental therapy sessions had the same charm as they did back in March 15th, 2018. It's always so cool having a meeting with her, knowing she listens and gives me advice. Should note that in freshman year, I often got into some conflict with my parents. She kind of acted like an appeals court in a sense when it came to conflict to us. So I'm really thankful for having her in my life and being able to keep up on how well I'm doing mentally. So yeah, a lot of things changed during this time. And yes, we're finally into the post-depression era, meaning I no longer have to be super serious. Like, I hate being all super serious and talking about very dark topics. So let's relax and go back to casual story time. Now, the post-depression era lasted from March 13th, 2018 to December 19th, 2018. Now, when I was in the car going to the mental hospital back on March 8th, my mom told me there would be something good that will happen from this situation. She was partially incorrect. It wasn't just something good that will go right. No, almost everything that could go right went right. There was a couple bad things that happened, but I'll explain them when I get there, and they weren't even that bad. But for the most part, this time period was probably the best time period of my life. This means that yes, we can finally joke and have fun now. And also, this is probably my favorite time period to talk about. I was just so happy and life was going absolutely perfectly. Of course, there were a couple struggles in this time period, but it still was an absolutely amazing time, and I love talking about this time period. So let's start off my first day back, being Wednesday, March 14th, 2018. I went back to school. I stated earlier that my schedule changed. So previously, my schedule was science first, then English, then PE, then lunch, then back to English, then algebra, and then to art. But that schedule changed a bit. So now I started with English, then science, then PE, then lunch, then back to science, then algebra, and then finally art. This meant that I had classes with a lot of friends, including Brian. I also had a lot of classes with Sebrin, who I mentioned earlier. Both of these friends were absolutely amazing, and we're all still friends today. I also had a lot of classes with friends from church. Remember, this was before the betrayal at Fuge. See Storytime 7 for more information on that. I should note that the only classes I had with bullies were in PE, algebra, and art. However, Ryan was with me in art. My algebra teacher made sure I was away from the bullies in this class, and a very unusual circumstance would cause me to be out of PE for the rest of the school year, which I'll explain in a bit. I then remember a conversation I had that morning with my science teacher. She warned me that her second block was very crazy. I was kind of used to crazy. I mean, I already spent 7 months dealing with a bunch of assholes, but I very quickly adapted to the new class. Everyone really liked me, and of course I sat with Ryan in this class, as well as every other class. I never once felt left out, and I always felt like part of the group. Of course, I was no longer the king of Kahoot, as there were a lot of smarter students in here, but I still was much happier, and it fit very well in. This also meant that now I was eating lunch with the new class. I of course sat with Ryan, Sebrin, and their friends. It was a great time to be alive. Like now, I was not the kid eating alone at his own table, or that one kid who ate somewhere else because he felt insecure about himself. I was truly a part of a group and felt included, something I never felt since 7th grade. Throughout all of 8th grade, I was left out and seemed like nobody really cared about me. Now, I finally felt that people really wanted me, because this class really loved, like, everyone in my, specifically my second block, science, loved me. Like, they really wanted me to be in the class, and I always felt included. So I had a lot of schoolwork to do that I needed to catch up on. So I mentioned earlier that I had a ton of schoolwork to do on March 8th, which I of course never did that day because of what happened. However, my teachers were all very gracious to me and gave me as much time as I needed. I managed to get everything done in about 2 weeks. I should also note that I skipped PE most of the days in order to do schoolwork, which is still a win-win situation since I still had PE with the bullies. Now that night was also interesting. So 8th graders had to attend a curriculum fair for high school. This was when we chose our courses for 9th grade. I completely forgot what I chose. Why? Well, this event was a waste of time, as a very unique event occurred in about 1.5 months. Of course, I didn't think that this was for no reason at the time, but the event in early May is what made this event useless. Now let's move on to March 28th, 2018. So in this situation, I made a both very stupid and a very genius decision. I'll explain why in a bit. So our swim team had just finished up the short course season, which I explained what that was on 2 weeks ago on Storytime 8. Therefore, we decided to host a celebration. My swim coach grilled some hot dogs, some hamburgers, and it seemed like it would be a great event. Well, that would be until we realized we could get into the tennis net, or the tennis court, which was maybe 100 feet away from our coach. So I was with a couple friends on the tennis court. I told them I was going to try to jump the net. So I attempted to do it. However, my foot got caught in the net, and I fell forward. I used my arms to protect my head. When I fell, both of my arms hurt a lot, but I honestly don't think they were broken. I mean, they hurt, but they didn't hurt that bad, so I tried to shake it off. My friends had to help me up, though. However, I couldn't move my left arm at all, and I couldn't move my right arm that much. One of my friend's moms works as a nurse, so she checked it out. She recommended that I go to the emergency room. Therefore, my sister called my dad telling him about what happened, so he left work early, told mom, and then went straight to the emergency room. Now, the hospital I stayed at for the depression was a different hospital than this one. It's only about maybe 30 minutes away. This hospital was only like 5 minutes away, if that. However, the wait was painful. I was given ice to help with my arm, but they continued to ache until I was finally called up a couple hours later. The doctor looked at me and did x-rays on both of my arms. Turns out, I completely shattered my left arm, although I had only minor breaks in my right arm. Therefore, I had to wear a splint on both arms. Yeah, talk about shaking it off. So that Thursday, the day after breaking my arms, was the only day of school I missed because of my arms. Of course, I would miss 4 days total. Of course, the other 3 days were because of that whole situation on March 8th. After Thursday, we hit spring break. And then, I had to spend my spring break in 2 splints. Well, it was only until that Monday, which I'll explain what happened. But, I believe I had a quiz for algebra that Thursday, which I did when I returned. Other than that, I really did not miss anything. So that Thursday, I mostly slept. I ended up sleeping until 2 o'clock that day. Mom had taken the day off in order to care for me. I mostly watched YouTube videos that day since I obviously couldn't do much. Mom emailed my teachers letting them know. And my science teacher told the class what happened, because the class had actually asked where I was. Remember, these people loved me, and they absolutely loved it when I was in class. So they were very wary when they realized I wasn't at class that day. My youth pastor and discipleship pastor came to visit me that night. We talked. It was great. Now we reached Friday, March 30th, 2018. So I had a mental therapy appointment that day. So I had to go to that. It was weird doing one in a splint, but oh well. The rest of the day wasn't too eventful. Then comes Easter Sunday, being April 1st, 2018. No pranks were pulled, but it felt really weird going to church. It wasn't too bad though. I remember walking to Sunday school, but then 2 boys from school came out of nowhere. One said, "Bro, I thought our science teacher was lying." Wow, she wasn't. A lot of people talked to me at church that day, even some girls as well. Now we reach April 2nd, 2018. So on this day, we drove to Charlotte to have a meeting with my doctor. So he got a good look at my arms, and he determined that I would not have to wear a splint on my right arm. He also noticed some bulls I got on the splints from both arms, as the splints were not very comfortable and were attached pretty poorly. So he got a new one on my left arm. However, I would have surgery on the left arm in 2 days. I completely shattered my left arm, so that's what had to be done. Now let's discuss that surgery. Wednesday, April 4th, 2018. It was at some surgery center located in downtown Charlotte. So we got there early, so we just drove around downtown. Once it was time, we went back and the doctor was waiting right by the door ready for us. He wasted no time in making sure I was comfortable and getting ready for the surgery. He told my mom what was going to happen, and he also told me about what was happening too. So we weren't too scared. He gave me the anesthesia, and I immediately fell asleep. And then he had the team got to work. Surgery, I believe, lasted an hour and a half, but I slept for a total of like 3 hours. I remember waking up to see my parents looking over me while I was in bed. Doctors noticed this too, so they helped me get out of bed and got me situated on a sofa. I noticed my doctor had put a new splint on me, which made sense since he had to rip off the old one to perform the new surgery. Anyways, I don't remember what I said, but I probably said some really stupid shit since I was high and all. And we got back, I remember I slept on the sofa in my room rather than my bed since I didn't want to put pressure on my arm. Now let's talk about that next morning. I woke up at 4 in the morning and my left arm was agonizing. My mom also woke up and she gave me some hydrocodone, which helped me out a lot. However, I couldn't go to sleep, so I just went to the kitchen to make some oatmeal. And I should note that yes, I could still do things with my right arm. It was not in a splint, and it wasn't even in a splint anymore. It was literally the only arm that was in a splint was my left arm. That's how I was able to still play video games during this time, as I'm right-handed, so this worked out very well. Now we reached Friday, April 6, 2018. This was an absolutely amazing day. However, it really would not spark until that night. So the week before this, at the mental therapy session, my therapist told my parents that I should receive my phone back, as it was unhealthy for me to be in a room alone with 2 broken arms and have no contact with the outside world. My parents were pretty stubborn on this, but they ultimately gave me my phone back a week later. So I had my phone back. As a result, I decided to come back to social media. I started being active on Instagram more. Of course, YouTube would be a little while, but it'll come back eventually. But the best part about this night was Aki and his parents coming over that day. Now, I discussed who Aki was in a story time, but if you didn't watch the video, basically, Aki was a friend from Swim. He liked anime, TV, video games, and all that good stuff, and we are still very close friends today. He and his parents brought me some Doritos, some peanuts, some goldfish, and I can't remember what the fourth food was they brought me. They stayed for about an hour. Me and Aki were on the computer doing something random, I don't remember. After Aki and his family left, I think I stayed up to like 3 in the morning playing video games while eating goldfish. It was absolutely amazing that night. Now, I want to talk about a game I had been really into since June of 2016. But after depression, my interest skyrocketed. So I really liked a game called Clash Royale. You've probably heard about it. It's a mobile game where you create a deck of 8 cards to try to use those cards to destroy your opponent's 3 towers. I got extremely interested in this game after breaking my arms. I quit around mid-August of 2018, but I recently came back just about a month ago. So now let's discuss my first day back to school in a splint. This was April 9th, 2018. So this was a really interesting day. I remember getting a lot of attention, of course. I mean, I survived breaking both of my arms almost 2 weeks ago now. People want to hear my story. I also remember my science teacher pulling me out of class that day to talk about my arm. Yeah, I was getting quite a bit of popularity. So, I mentioned that my breaking of my arms was also a genius move. Why? Well, I got out of PE for the rest of the school year. So the way PE worked was that for the rest of the school year, I'd be in my algebra teacher's room. I should note, no bullies. I only had one class with a bully. And I had a friend to help back me up. I also remember spending a lot of time on my phone there too. Normally we aren't allowed to have our phones out for the entire time at school, but my algebra teacher let me have my phone out. So I also remember spending a lot of time playing Clash Royale during this period when I was not doing schoolwork. I then go with the teachers to lunch. Getting out of PE was amazing, as I still had to deal with the bullies there. So now there was only one class I had to deal with the bully, which we'll get later. But for this day, I spent my time making up a quiz. I was supposed to do before spring break, but that was finished and everything was good. Now, nothing else really happened that day, so let's move on to Friday, April 13th, 2018. Now, I'm not that superstitious, but I do believe that 13 is an unlucky number. I mean, all the events that occurred when I was 13 years old. Also, I believe that Friday the 13th is a day filled with disaster. Almost every Friday the 13th has gone horribly wrong. But this was actually different. It was a great day that day, and oh shit, I just threw a marker. I remember that our school did a dodgeball competition between each team. If you don't know what teams are, I mentioned last week's story time, so check that out. For reference, I was on the Rockets team this year. Each team had... Why did I include... I just realized how really stupid I just sounded. Like, I said, you don't know what teams are, but then I literally mentioned what teams were. Each team had to have a certain amount of boys and a certain amount of girls. Every single boy on our team except me signed up. We all joked about how I didn't sign up. Like, yeah, I totally could have played extremely well with the splint on, and nothing bad would happen. Nah, I just sat out with the boys that didn't make the cut. I remember us cheering on our team, though. That was pretty hilarious. I remember shouting out every cuss word in the book, too. I didn't cuss directly at people, but I may or may not have shouted a few FUs at other teams. I never recall doing it, too, so it was really funny. Should be noted that while I still cuss today, I mean, have you watched the damn video? I do not cuss that violently as I did when I was 13. As a 16-year-old now, I limit myself in how much I cuss just because cussing really only makes you feel mature and makes you sound mature when you do it right and when you limit yourself. Anyways, that night, that cussing really didn't matter too much because that night we going to praise Lord Jesus, hallelujah. Went to a church event that night. It was really good and so much fun. I'm not going to discuss it here since it's not really related to school, but I'll actually talk about it next week, March 12th, 2021. However, I will mention that I room with some boys at school, most of whom I had classes with. Next, I want to discuss the other fight that I vividly remember. So this fight took place when we were transitioning from second block to PE. I, of course, went to my algebra teacher's room. I sat down and then I saw my algebra teacher running down, as well as many teachers and students. So apparently 2 girls got in a fight downstairs. I was upstairs, by the way. Now, 2 boys fighting is one thing, but 2 girls fighting is, in my opinion, far worse, mostly because they pull hair. This fight did include pulling hair. My algebra teacher told me about what had happened, but then I also got more accounts from other students. So then our team decides to host a field trip for the team to celebrate our work that year. We were going to go to a baseball game located about an hour away. I did not go on this field trip, and instead, I stayed back at school doing schoolwork. Why did I do this? Well, I had 2 reasons. The first is pretty obvious. I didn't want a ball hitting my left arm, as if it did, it would have probably Phil Swifted my arm pretty quickly. The other reason was that I just didn't feel like going. It was going to be very hot today, and it was outdoors too, and I didn't want to sweat all day, so I did schoolwork that day. What's so funny is that I never told my parents about it. In fact, I never did tell them about it. Them watching my video right now is probably the first time they'll ever hear about this trip. That's what I like about Storytime. My parents watch my videos, and they learn a lot that I've never really told them since I never mentioned them during this time. In this case, it's been almost 3 years since, and they still don't know about it. Well, they know about it now, but the cool thing is that it's funny now. It took me 3 years to tell them about it when it should have only taken me a single night. The reason I didn't tell them about it was when it should have... The reason I didn't tell them about it was that I was scared they'd force me to go, which I did not want to do. If this took place now, they wouldn't really care. But this was 3 years ago, so they'd probably want me to go on this trip. Oh well, it benefited both me and my parents. I got out of the trip and didn't have my parents save, and I also had my parents save $12 as well as possible new medical bill from a ball hitting my arm. I should note that the boys went on this trip too. My friends also went on this trip. Now, the funny part about this trip revolved around Robbie. For those that were not going, we were going to the algebra room. Robbie was there, and then we saw him try to do a Fortnite dance or something like that. Then, out of nowhere, he fell and his knee just started hurting like crazy. They ended up having to get a stretcher for him, and he was taken to the emergency room. What happened was that Robbie had dislocated his knee. Of course, at the time, it was pretty serious, but now the whole situation is so stupid and hilarious because it came out of nowhere. Me, Robbie, Ryan, and Sebrin all still laugh at this situation today. Robbie joined me in my math teacher's room during PE, since he obviously couldn't do PE with a displaced knee. However, he'd eventually go back to PE in mid-May, while I never came back for PE for the entire school year just because me completely shattering my arm was way more serious. Now let's fast forward to April 27, 2018. So this would be the final day I ever wore a splint. I had a meeting with my doctor. He said that he wanted to try to regain as much movement as my arm could, so therefore I came out without a splint and was signed up for physical therapy every Monday and Wednesday throughout the month of May. This physical therapy sessions, overall though, were pretty easy and effective. I managed to regain a lot of strength on my left arm. I also got my stitches removed on my arm, so my scar from surgery was visible. It's still on me right now, and probably will be for the rest of my life. Now we hit May of 2018. This month started out with a bang by me going to a city called Wilmington, a coastal city about 5 hours away from Charlotte. We had been planning on this trip since the 7th grade, and now I finally got to go. It lasted from May 2nd to May 5th. What's so cool about this trip was that this occurred just a week after I got out of the splint. Perfect timing. However, while I was able to go up there and have a blast, I had to restrict myself in what I did. My arm could not touch the salt water, so therefore I stayed out of that. I also could not go skating the first night, but I still played some arcade games, and something really cool happened that night, which I'll explain. So May 2nd, 2018, wow, this was an amazing day that was. So I had already packed my suitcase the night before. Well, it wasn't mine, it was my dad's. My dad used the same suitcase when we went to Germany for a business trip. He let me use it for Wilmington since it had wheels, and I could not carry any bags due to my arm. Now, normally, my mom took me to school, but today my dad took me instead. While I was not in a split, my dad helped me with the suitcase. He also helped turn in the Zoloft to the coordinator so I wouldn't get in trouble for drugs. That day at school went by pretty normally though, and then around 2:30 we packed our suitcases on the bus. Now this bus was a massive coach bus, not no damn school bus. It had portable chargers and everything. The seats were really comfortable too, so we were set. The back seat had 3 seats rather than just 2 to a side of the row. Therefore, I sat with 2 friends from a different team. Those 2 boys were named Michael and Todd. Me and Michael saw that Todd fall asleep, so we decided to play a prank on him. I managed to get his phone, and then I pulled up Rap God. I then skipped to the extremely loud and fast part, and placed the phone right on him. So when he woke up, he just casually heard talking on the bus while Eminem was going crazy with the lyrics. It was funny, and Todd found it funny too. Although I can't remember, I believe he also pulled a similar prank on me, and it worked. I just can't remember it. The bus ride was really fun. Now we are going to discuss the rooms and selecting roommates. Now, I already chose my room. We already chose our roommates like a week prior to this. I was rooming with Sebron and 2 other friends. Robbie couldn't go because of behavioral issues, and Ryan didn't want to go. But Sebron is still such an awesome guy, so I roomed with him. And I don't think the bullies went either, so I knew I was going to have a blast, and I did. So that night, we went to the skating rink. I was not able to skate due to my arm, but I did play some arcade games. I forgot what it was, but I played one arcade game that had so many levels. If you reached the max level, you could get a crazy reward. So I did this. I remember being about maybe 5/6 of the way to the crazy reward, and then like 45 boys huddled up around me. They saw this and were like, oh shit, this dude is about to win big time. I also remember them doing a drum roll at the last level. I clicked at the right time and managed to win it. Me and all the boys surrounding me went absolutely ballistic. Some skaters also got off the rink just to join in on the chaos. This dude with a broken arm just won the grand prize, $50. I spent the $50 on souvenirs for me and some friends. The situation was a pretty big talk throughout the school for the rest of the school year too. So yeah, even more attention I was getting and more recognition. That night at the skating rink was crazy. The next day would be May 4th, 2018. That day we toured a fort. We also got to go to an island off the coast. It was really interesting. While there, we also caught some sea creatures. I can't remember what they were. That night we went bowling. It was fun too. Overall, while it was eventful, I don't remember the details very well since this was almost 3 years ago. I also remember that night getting a text from my mom saying that she has a big surprise when I got home. So unlike the others being sad that they're going, I was pretty happy to leave because I was excited to see the surprise. Like, yeah, I wanted the trip to stay longer, but I still was super hyped for what would happen. Now we hit the last full day of the trip. So this day, I do not remember too much, but I do remember playing on the beach that afternoon. So I brought my football from home up to the trip, and it proved to be really useful. So our teachers had brought balls with them, but they were pretty old. I had a brand new football, so me and some 35 boys played football. I decided to quit playing after like 45 minutes to check on what my friends were doing, but I let the boys continue playing just as long as they didn't damage the football. Oh, and I should note we were playing tackle football. We could have played tackle football, but everyone knew about my arm, and so we just played it safe. That night, and we still had about as equally as much fun as we would have had we played tackle football. That night, we then went on a ferry ride across the ocean. There was a dance party on the boat. Of course, I didn't participate since I suck ass at dancing. They also sold refreshments, and I remember buying some for me and some friends. I also FaceTimed my sister on the boat, and so she got to take part in this too. It was really fun, but I was very exhausted. So the next day, we packed up the bus and headed on out. This bus ride was pretty smooth. When we got back to school, my mom picked me up. I then asked her about the surprise and she gave me a letter. Remember when I applied to go to early college? Well, I got accepted. This was amazing. I'd been wanting to go to this school since the 6th grade, and they accepted me. Holy shit, could life get any better than this? The answer? Absolutely. Now, before I continue talking about why life was so good, I want to go back to Sir. So I mentioned Sir as being one of the bullies. I still had classes with him in art, so this day in particular was in the middle of May, and this is why I call him Sir. Now, something to know about my art teacher was that she was nice, but she was too nice to the point that she was passive. So if you did anything crazy, she probably wouldn't care. That's what Sir did, so we made a cardboard sword. That day, Ryan was not at school today, so he decided to hit me with a sword. I never said anything that day to him, at least I don't remember saying anything to him. Before this, I remember him shouting that I lived in a cardboard box and that he used to make the sword out of. Then he hit me right in the left arm. What's funny is that throughout the entirety of April, I showed up in a splint on my left arm. I literally had a scar to prove it. How much more of a low-life asshole can you be? Teacher only said stop, but in a very passive voice. She never really took any real action against him. I think that if the teacher decided to take action, the situation would have been a whole lot better. Now, back to good things. I also was working on my own art project, so I spent about 3 weeks working on a paper mache Dorito. Dorito was an equilateral triangle with each side measuring about 2.5 feet. It was a very successful and still one of my favorite projects I've ever done. However, my mom for some reason has a lot of beef with this Dorito. For almost 3 years, she's been trying to throw it away, but she is never successful. She's since given up on it, but she'll probably one day attempt to throw it away again, but I'm gonna stop her. So now it's test time. So in our state from grades 3 to 8, we do a little thing called EOGs for both English and math, and a science EOG for grades 5th and 6th. I did not take the 8th grade math EOG though, since I took Algebra 1 that year, but it would have been its own exam. EOG stand for end of grade exams. They never counted towards your final grade, but it helped with the class placement and helped the student understand how much you learned and more teaching. My reading and science EOGs weren't that special. I made the same grade on my reading as I did in 6th, 7th grade, and my science EOG stayed the same as it did in 5th grade. Now, I still have 2 more exams to discuss. So I had an EOC, or an end of course exam for algebra, and then a final exam for Earth Environmental Science. Now, these are the types of exams we take in high school, as we take final exams in all of our classes except Algebra 1, 10th grade English, Biology, and Algebra 2, in which I take EOCs. EOCs are much more important and much harder and longer than final exams, by the way. They also count 20% of your final grade. I only took 2 EOCs, as my English and Biology EOCs got canceled because of coronavirus. I also took one EOC, and I only took 1 EOC in middle school, that being Algebra 1. It was and then there's, of course, the Algebra 2 one, which I mentioned had a very unusual circumstance. This Algebra 1 EOC was very easy in my opinion, as I mentioned earlier that I was finally understanding the concepts and was doing exceptionally well in algebra. So I really did not struggle, and I was right. I made a 94 on the EOC. In order to pass this class, you had to make at least a B, at least an 80. I managed to make an 88 for this class, something I never imagined in a billion years in quarters 2 and 3. Next, we reach Earth Environmental Science exam. So this was a rather interesting exam. When I did this exam, I thought I did absolute dog shit. Like, everything was confusing and I had no clue what the hell the questions were asking. But fortunately, I was lucky. I managed to make an A on this exam, and as a result, managed to come out of Earth Environmental Science with a 90, exactly an A. This was another class I doubted if I'd make at least 1 A in, but sure enough, I did it. Now let's move on to May 31st, 2018. So I finished up everything for physical therapy, and week prior, now I had a doctor's appointment. The doctor said that I was in a great shape, and I agreed. He said that I could go back to swimming in 2 weeks. It would actually be about 3.5 weeks before I came back to swimming, though. So I'll explain in a bit. I then have one last doctor's appointment regarding my arm. That won't be until July. Now let's move on to Friday, June 8th, 2018. What an absolutely amazing day this was. Why? Well, it was the last day of school. So each grade had an end-of-year celebration where they recognized students' hard work. You could get awards for making the highest grades in your classes, making the highest grades on EOGs or final exams, AIR-related awards, sports, and other awards. Now in 7th grade, I barely got a chance to sit down from all the awards I got. I made a story time discussing 7th grade. I'll talk more about that. Now in 8th grade, I got less awards. I still got to stand up for AB honor roll though. However, remember when my world history teacher said I was not going to be successful in the class had I not come prepared? Well, I completely embarrassed him here. I got the award for making the highest grade for world history. Yeah, talk about a total backfire. Here he was talking about why I wasn't going to do well since I didn't come prepared, and then I'm over here now not coming prepared, and then I just make the highest grade. So my mom signed me out right after the awards, as she got pretty emotional afterwards, and I completely understand. 8th grade was such a massive struggle for me, especially with me hitting the darkest point in my life. So seeing her son not only come out alive, but also being very successful in school made her extremely happy. I was really emotional that day too. That morning was the last time I ever stepped into a traditional public school as a student. As for high school, I would be going to early college. Ryan, Robbie, Sebring, none of them made the decision, so they were going to traditional high school instead. I knew very few people who would be going to early college, but I eventually got to know them and became good friends with them, and I'm still good friends with them in junior year. So normally, this is where I finish a story time about a certain grade, but that's not going to happen with this story time. The events of March 8th were so severe, but in the end, they were extremely rewarding. I've already discussed rewards, like switching classes, being the happiest person I've ever been, and more. But I'm not done with the post-depression period. So I decided that I will discuss the summer of 2018, as well as the first month as a freshman at early college. So I commonly refer to the summer of 2018 as the greatest summer ever, and the summer of 2019 were amazing summers. This summer gave a lot of deserved rest I needed after such a long and tough school year. Also, in previous summers, my parents had me and my sister do a bit of schoolwork over the summer. I really don't understand why though, since summer is meant for us to rest, not to work. But I didn't have any schoolwork this summer since my then future 9th grade English teacher already gave us a summer reading assignment. I would do this in July though. And also the summer of 2019 we didn't do anything because, well, they just didn't feel like it, and in 2020 I took online courses, so they had no reason to. Now the summer of 2018 was very short, as early college started August 6, 2018. Therefore, I had just under 2 months of summer vacation, but those 2 months were absolutely magical. So the beginning of the summer had quite a lot going for it. For the first week, we went up to Delaware to visit family. I don't remember much from this trip, but I'm pretty sure I had a good time. Second week, though, would be a lot more eventful. I would have a church trip this week. It's called Fuge. I've already done an entire story time on Fuge 2018, so you could check out that if you'd like. Now, I mentioned in that video that I really hated this trip, as on the first day I had nobody to room with, and basically the people at church betrayed me. That's when I found out a lot of friends I made in 8th grade were actually fakes. I should also note that Ryan, Robbie, and Sebring were not part of this trip. None of them go to my church. But the friends I did make who also went to my church really didn't care about me. So therefore I ended up learning the hard truth at this trip. This was all the first day. The rest of the days were actually pretty good except June 21st, 2018, my 14th birthday, which I explained why that went so horribly in my story time about Fuge. However, I did make some pretty great memories up there. I remember playing a lot of Clash Royale, since I was only allowed my phone and not any other electronic devices. Looking back at it, if my friends weren't a bunch of fakes, I wasn't left out, and I had not had a birthday up there, I would have probably enjoyed this trip a lot. However, Fuge did ultimately allow me to have one of the best days of my life, June 23rd, 2018. This was the last day of Fuge, and thank God, honestly. I was tired and just ready to get home. I was done with it. I was done with being around people at church. So we took a 7-hour trip back home, and oh my God, that night was legendary. So I decided to actually celebrate my birthday on June 23rd, 2018, as I obviously was away for my actual birthday. Of course, the youth had different ideas, which hindered my experience at Fuge, but I still had my plans to celebrate on the 23rd, and it worked out perfectly. So I got home that night and noticed my room was switched around. My parents gave my room a makeover while I was gone, and it looked great. I also saw some presents on my bed. The presents included a copy of Pokemon Ultra Moon, an iTunes card, a bag of Doritos, and some clothes. We did have dinner as a family by the pool that night at around 8 o'clock. Afterwards, I ate the rest of my dinner while playing BTD6, a game that had just came out. I also bought a bunch of music. Life was amazing that day, or just that night. It was one of the 2 days that I think perfectly demonstrates how rewarding and amazing the post-depression period was. Now, let's jump to 2 days later on June 25th, 2018. So because of my broken arm, I couldn't do swim. However, my doctor said on May 31st that I could go back to swim about 2 to 3 weeks from then. I was out of town during that time, so I had plenty of time. So June 25th, 2018 was the day I came back to swimming after a 3-month break. Now, my coach had been asking me a lot while my arm was broken when I would come back, which I honestly think asking this over and over was a bit excessive. I should be taking my time to let my arm heal. I still did this at least. I also remember my coach not really letting me on how much to do that day, which I think was an issue too. I think I did more than what I should have done, since it was my first day back and therefore should have been more relaxed. But that practice was still actually pretty enjoyable and a very fun way to get back to swimming. So from the end of Fuge through early July, I didn't do a whole lot. I mostly laid around and just simply enjoyed the post-depression period. However, in mid-July, we'd go on a family beach trip. This beach trip we do almost every summer. We didn't do it in the summer of 2019 because my sister had a cheer camp, but we still did it every night. We spent about a week at a beach house we rented. The beach house is small but very good. It has 3 bathrooms, so one for me, one for my sister, and one for my parents. Most of these vacations are honestly quite forgettable, and I don't remember much for them. This was the case with this trip, but I still remembered a lot of great things we got to do. I remember going go-kart riding and seeing a girl that I think I might go to my school. I think I talked more about this in our previous story time. I also remember, of course, playing on the beach and having a blast. So probably the thing I remember most from this beach trip was my decision to come back to YouTube. So we were at the beach house for about 9 days, from Thursday to the next Saturday. I uploaded my first 2 videos since March while up there. Those being me defeating the Dark Sun in Miitopia and me beating Ultra Necrozma on Pokemon Ultra Moon. Both of these videos were really fun to upload and the beach trip overall was fun. So now we got back home. Nothing else really go on until the end of the summer. During this time, I did was lay around and relax, exactly what I deserved after such a long and brutal school year. However, I had my final doctor's appointment regarding my arm in late July. Nothing really special happened other than the fact that the doctor said that my arm was almost completely normal. Only unusual circumstance about my left arm at this point was that, as well as today, is that I have a scar from surgery and I can only bend my arm 179 degrees. Other than that, my arm was back to normal. So now let's fast forward a bit to early August, August 3rd to be exact. So our family had been deciding to go to Noah's Ark replica for a long time, as we had coupons for it. We chose this time. This Ark was located in Cincinnati, Ohio. So we drove up to Ohio and got to stay there for 2 nights. It was a cool trip, but nothing else that big happened, so we head back down. The day after we got back from Cincinnati, this would be my first day of high school, so early college's schedule works a bit differently than the rest of the colonies. We started back in the second week of August, but we would get out of school 2 weeks before Memorial Day, so my freshman year ended May 21st, 2019, rather than sometime in June. So for the first day of school, it was only us freshmen that went out. Then the next day, the sophomores were off on a trip, meaning it was just us and the juniors, as the seniors didn't start until 2 weeks later. That night, being August 10th, was one of the best days ever. Just like June 23rd, it too competed as a day that shined as a post-depression memory, and makes me super thankful to be alive. So this day, we went rock climbing. This day was so much fun. I managed to meet 4 new friends that day. 3 of them would be permanent, and I would go back, and 1 would go back to his own school at the end of this year. I already discussed these people in my video on intensives, which I believe is Storytime 6. Me and my friend also made a deformed gummy bear at Golden Corral too. Although it might not seem like it, this is still such a great memory I have. I remember everyone being exhausted that day, as I was one of the few people who didn't fall asleep on the bus. But this was such an amazing and very nostalgic day. So I don't have a definite ending to the post-depression period, but I generally consider it to have been ended sometime in October of 2018. This would be mostly because I started to get pretty stressed regarding schoolwork, as well as starting to despise swimming. I also got into a lot of conflicts with my parents, which I deeply regret getting to looking back at it. So this is where I'm going to end the story time portion of the story time. I began with the beginning of 8th grade and ended with the beginning of freshman year. Now, I want to discuss how I'm doing right now as a 16-year-old junior at early college high school. So one thing I've noticed is that the beginning of the year is always the roughest part of the year. I've had this trend occur since 2017. 2018 was probably the biggest example of this trend, as I struggled a lot in the beginning of 2018, but eventually became super happy and starting most of the time around April. 2020 was the only exception, as coronavirus made me a bit less happy. But right now in March of 2020, I am really happy. I'm definitely not at my peak happiness as I was in post-depression, but I am really happy overall. I'm able to control my emotions much better now, and I also know how to deal with assholes like the bullies from 8th grade. Also, I'm a lot more mature and wiser. Of course, age had an impact, but the situation on March 8th is what I consider to be why I became more mature and wiser. I also want to mention that this day also occasionally negatively impacts me today. Ever since the situation started, I started having nightmares about about the events of March 8th. Even 3 years later, I still have nightmares about this whole situation. Now, I want to discuss something that I never talk about in story time, that is, the future. So the events of March 8th really impacted me. I started earlier that nobody should ever go through the events I went through. However, this also affects the future as well. Before these events, I always wanted to be a video game designer when I grow up. However, after struggling with these hardships, as well as my stay at the hospital, I realized that it was just not for me. So many other students struggle with the same thing as me. I didn't want anyone to have to go through what I went through 3 years ago. Ever since then, I really had an interest in being a middle school math teacher. I love math, and I also want to help other students. I also want to be a massive influence in students' lives. My 8th grade teachers were and still are massive influences in my life. They helped me become less latent. I want to be like them. I want to influence younger generations and help not endure what I had to do. So now, I want to thank a few people before ending the video. These people were people who helped me through such a dark time in my life. Without them, I might not even be here anymore. I also will have a message for the bullies as well as some others at the end. My first thank you goes to my parents. For almost 17 years, y'all have provided me and made sure I was the best I could be. Damn, that is a long time. Y'all were both there for me on the darkest day of my life, but y'all were also there on the best days of my life. So thank you, Mom and Dad. Y'all are the greatest parents I could have ever asked for. My next thank you goes to my algebra teacher. Your workload was tiring and often excessive at times, but it made me stronger and smarter. If I did not receive the homework, I would probably have never understood anything from the class. However, you knew when it was too much, so you levied yourself. Thank you. You were an awesome teacher and taught me more math than any other teacher ever. You were also the teacher who inspired me to one day be a math teacher myself. My third thank you goes to my 8th grade English teacher. You helped me realize that I was not alone in my struggles. You too were going through a very tough hardship. Realizing I was not the only person struggling with a hardship made me very confident about myself. You also made sure I understood everything and made sure I was successful. Thank you for helping me understand that I was not alone in such a dark time. My fourth thank you goes to my 8th grade science teacher. You heard the warnings. You went out of your way to make sure I was alright. Making sure I was fine was a top priority of yours. Many teachers put their paychecks or grades as a top priority, but you put the well-being of your students first. As a result, I ultimately did not have to endure even worse events that night, and I'm still alive today. So thank you for caring for those who needed it the most and putting your students as your top priority. My fifth thank you goes to my youth pastor. You being there at school on March 8th was no coincidence. It was a God thing. You were there for a reason, and that was to help me on my darkest day. You have helped me grow my relationship in God and helped me become a better Christian. While I still make mistakes today, I have hope and forgiveness now. You helped me on a path to this. So thank you for being there when I needed them the most, and thank you for helping me to come to know Christ. My sixth thank you goes to my 8th grade counselor. A counselor's job is to make sure everyone is doing okay. You did that, but you took it to the next level. You made sure that I would come out of the situation happy and healthy. You guided my mom on what to do when she didn't know. You stayed on top of my mental health after the situation. You tried your best to make sure I was not bullied. So thank you for going out of your way to make sure I was doing well. My seventh thank you goes to my mental therapist. Talking to you about my problems is something that I am extremely thankful for. Before the situation, I never really had anyone I could discuss all of my problems with. I was always too scared to talk to my parents, but you were someone I could talk to and still trust today. We've known each other for 3 amazing years, and I hope to continue that for many years to come. Thank you for being someone I can come talk to and trust. My 8th thank you goes to Robbie. We have been friends for 4 years. You helped me through this situation. We laughed together, we cried together, but ultimately we were friends and we matured together. So thank you for being someone who understood my struggle and being there for me in my darkest hours. My 9th thank you goes to Ryan. For 4 years, you have been my role model. You are a very smart and very calm person. While I try to obtain some of the traits you have, I often fail, but you inspire me to be a better person and more mature. So thank you for being an amazing role model. My 10th and final thank you goes to Sebrin. Your streams are so entertaining to watch. You are also such a nice person, and you make sure I am okay. Thank you for entertaining me for 3 years, and hopefully many more to come. Now for my message to the bullies. Y'all are the worst bullies ever. Like, y'all absolutely suck at bullying. Y'all's goal was to tear me down throughout the school year, but y'all might have done that short term. Y'all ultimately ended up making me much stronger than I ever could have been. Even 3 years later, I still consider y'all as people who made me stronger. So thank y'all. As much as y'all tore me up, thank y'all for making me stronger. I know that y'all are most likely not watching this video, but I hope y'all are doing very well right now, and I hope y'all grew wiser and more mature just like I did. I then have a message for those struggling with depression. You are not alone. Thousands of others your age are also struggling with depression, but don't give up hope. You will probably be happier than you ever were in your entire life when you finally are no longer depressed. That's what happened to me and many others whose depression ended. But if you get to that point, where you feel like you don't want to live anymore, or you feel suicidal, tell someone. That was one of the biggest mistakes I ever made. Had my science teacher not known last minute, I very well might not be here today. So express your thoughts, and let others know how you feel. You might think there are people who don't want you, but that is completely false. So many people want you to be here, and probably would not be able to live normally without you. I thought the same way, but then I realized my parents, my sister, my friends, they wouldn't be able to live as well as they do now had I not made it out. So let others know how you feel and never be discouraged. Lastly, I have a message for everyone watching this in general. So my message to y'all is to never be mean to anyone. It might sound generic, but it's a very valuable piece of advice. I want y'all to know. Y'all heard my story today. Y'all heard how tough this situation was. So don't put others in the same situation as I was. If you ain't got anything to say nice, then shut your ass up. Nobody should be in what I went through, so don't help them get into that situation. That's not the only thing I want to say though. I also want you to be inclusive. Notice people that seem to be left out. Try to include them and make sure that they feel like they are a part of a group, because you never know, you might be saving their life if you do so. Wow, we're finally done with the video. I've been planning and working on this video since before Storytime even began. This was the most important school year of my life. It's what changed me from being a child to being an adult. Every single day, I always remember the hardships of this year, and then I look at me now and just see how much better I am off now that I'm older and got through the hardship. When deciding when I went through hardships, my mind always focuses on 8th grade. Thank y'all for bearing with me for my almost 5-year career on YouTube, and thank y'all for being me during this time. Next week, I will be discussing Crew, what it is and how it worked. I'll see you guys next week. Bye!